Great. All right. Well, I have to follow a senator, so thank you very much. My name is Tony Boccanfuso. I'm President and CEO of a global network of universities and companies called UIDP. This is my second time in this great state and this wonderful city, so I want to thank Kirk and you all for having me as a moderator for this opening panel on urban-rural development. We have a distinguished and diverse and strategically assembled group of individuals to provide insights, and so I'll invite everybody up. All right, great. So it's a free country, you can sit wherever you want. I would note Suresh is wearing a tie. I don't wear ties unless I'm asking people for money, so today you're safe, Suresh. So, all right, well, great. So why don't we go through, we'll have the panelists introduce themselves from closest to me downstream. I think most of you all know them, but why don't we just do a quick introduction? I know the biographies are in the booklets or on the web, so.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Rhonda Phillips. It's delightful to be back in Vermont. I used to live here about 15 years ago. I got lucky. I got to spend a visiting year here when I was out at Arizona State University. Since that time, I've been at Purdue for the last 10 years, where Suresh and I were colleagues, and I'm making my way back eventually. I'm now moving to Pennsylvania to Pittsburgh, so sooner or later, I will make it all the way back to Vermont. I'm delighted to be here. My area is community and economic development, and I got really lucky. When I was here a while ago, I got the chance to meet one of your biggest promoters, Bruce Cipher, who unfortunately has passed away untimely, and we wrote a book together about what's so unique about Burlington and Vermont. And if you haven't had a chance to ever see it, do look it up. It's called Sustainable Communities. And that really gave me an appreciation for what all of you do here in Burlington as well as across the whole state. And you are unique and you are different in this context. And you're an innovator. And often other people across the country and beyond look to see what you're doing in this area because you are a promoter of things that are innovative and entrepreneurial. So I'm delighted to be back in Vermont, to be here with you today at this very special summit. And again, thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Sonny.
Sonny Eappen. I'm an anesthesiologist by training. I have been here about 6 months as the president and CEO of the University of Vermont Health Network.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Kurrle. That's one way to keep me quiet. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and I'm thrilled to be here with you this morning. And I'm not sure if my bio is up here, but I'll just give you a really quick, a little bit about me. But I have spent my life in Vermont, actually, and when the senators and Mrs. Leahy are in Middlesex, I am their neighbor. The other side of Middlesex, but also on a dirt road with praying for internet every day. But anyway, very proud to be in the state. I serve in the Scott administration and proudly work with UVM and many great partners around the state to serve Vermonters and promote our state to visitors and recruit people to Vermont to live here, try to fill our job vacancies, and work with employers and building communities, making them healthy and strong. So really happy to be here today. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay. I'm Lindsay's sidekick, as you can see. Welcome, everyone, on behalf of the entire university as well, Senator Leahy, Marcel. It's just wonderful to have Anson Tebbets here, Secretary Kurrle. Anson is the Secretary of Agriculture, and so many other leaders. It really is a wonderful event that's been put together. I will call out one person to thank, and that's Cynthia Beliveau. She's one of the most creative people I know. And she had a lot to do with what this conference will shape up to be. So, President of the University of Vermont and a professor of mechanical engineering, and somebody very, very dedicated to the land-grant mission of the university and what we should and can do to partner with the state. So thank you.
Sure. And Suresh didn't say this, but he's a member of the National Science Board, and it's really a benefit to this state to have Suresh in that position. So just as a little insight there. Okay, well, we had a series of questions that we thought we could prime the pump, and then if we have time, maybe we can do some questions from the audience, if that's allowable. So one of the benefits of my job is I get to travel around the world. Last week I was in Stockholm, I was in Nottingham, UK. I get to visit campuses and company sites all over the world. I live in South Carolina myself. Every region has assets. Some of them are physical, some of them are intellectual. I've seen this great campus, the city. I visited Hula the first time I was here. What a fantastic resource that is for this community. When you think about the assets that are available in the state, so not just in Burlington, but beyond in more rural settings, how do you think about that? And how do you then calibrate that in thinking about what the opportunities are downstream? So I'll open it to anyone. Maybe, Lindsay, you can start since you're in your role as in the state as a director of an agency.
All right. Can you hear me now? All right, it's working. Thank you for the question. The obvious, for many of us is Vermont's beauty, right? Our natural beauty, our landscape. That's a draw to folks. When I think about in terms of the economic development, I look at outdoor recreation. We're just scratching the surface. It's unlocking many things. A lot of people don't realize in Vermont what we have going on, where we're on the cutting edge of technology. You're going to hear from Kyle Clark in a little bit about electric airplanes. We have really great things happening right here in our state. And so what I would say is, what do we have for assets? We have many assets. But if I were to try to pitch our state, we have some things in common up here. We're all actually recruiting, right? You might be recruiting employees, right? People to keep us healthy and safe. And you're recruiting students and staff to educate them. I'm trying to recruit people to bring their business here, to start a business here, and people to work here. And so there's a couple things that I often find myself telling people is that don't underestimate us because of our size, because we punch above our weight here in Vermont. And what I mean by that is we are so well connected. If you are running into an obstacle, we can find a solution for you. We are so connected. If I need research help, right, we're connected. If I need technical assistance, we're connected to the regional development corporations. We're connected to the regional planning commissions. If I need to, somebody needs to pick up the phone and, they're having trouble in, with a permitting situation, we've got the agriculture secretary here. I can give them his phone number. Senator Leahy has done so much for us. And again, I mentioned, we're neighbors. He has done so much in our small state. He was the chair of the very powerful Appropriations Committee and has brought billions of dollars to Vermont. So again, I would just say a big asset is actually our size, and people underestimate us for that. I'm sorry to take it more time, but I would just want to also add is our location. As rural as we are, I drive really fast, so please don't judge me on my timing here, but we are less than 2 hours from Montreal, and we are probably 3.5 hours to Boston. We're in a corridor here also with Connecticut and to Montreal that we call the Aerospace Corridor. We are located where we are prime for international business, because companies that want to operate in the U.S. from outside see Vermont is a great place to start, again, because we're small and they can get connected. So those are a couple of things. I'm sorry, I could go on forever, but I want to give the others some chance to talk.
Yeah. Let me add to Lindsay's list. I think one thing that, as somebody who's been here now for 4 years, I notice is that this is a very entrepreneurial state. Probably doesn't occur to people when you think of Vermont, but there really is this stubbornness to people, this independence, which actually leads to being successful at entrepreneurship. And so, we all know it's difficult to grow businesses past a certain stage in sparsely populated states like ours. The talent pool and capital and such can be challenging, but it's happening. People are persisting and making things happen. Something that may not be well known or recognized is that our technology and manufacturing sector, the GDP from that in 2022 was 7 times the GDP from agriculture. Sorry, Anson. Agriculture is very important, but do you think of Vermont as a tech manufacturing state? You should. The issue is that we don't have Fortune 500 companies, but that's okay. Most of our companies are in that 50 to 150 employees, 100 to 300 million or so gross revenue, and that's what works here. And that's really quite distinctive. I've met with CEOs who run companies like that, and so what can we do to support that? So I think, Tony, to your question, what the assets of this place are, its can-do spirit, its founder spirit, and this unique ecosystem that seems to foster that size companies in biotech, in tech, manufacturing, et cetera, besides agriculture. Thanks.
Okay, well, we'll talk a little bit more about innovation ecosystems in a little bit. Sunny, I'd maybe talk with you for a second about the healthcare sector. Is obviously such a huge piece of the GDP, and you have to have deployment of resources all over the state. Can you maybe talk about how that factors in, because it's such an important part of the economy?
Yeah, so I was going to take a little different perspective about a real asset that we have here in Vermont, which is our people. But I'm going to take a little different twist as it looks at healthcare. Our population in Vermont truly cares about equity in the way we deliver care. That is that we want to deliver the same high-quality care to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. And we take that for granted. I was in Texas 3-4 months ago in Dallas, where about 20% of Texas citizens don't have health care, right? And that's bad. But you know what's even worse? Is that their citizens are okay with it, and we're not. And so that is a huge asset that we have that we need to build on, and we need to show the country what we can do here. And that means that we need to be able to deliver really high-quality, equitable care to everybody and do it at a price that's sustainable. Because we're the place that can do it because of our size. Our size actually helps us in some places here in Vermont and northern New York to be able to deliver that care. And we have to do it less expensively because of the way we wrap around our services. And we are set up to do that because of the people that we have here and the attitudes that they have. So I'll just take that perspective. I'll come back to rural health.
Yeah,
more.
no, that's great. And we'll continue. My daughter's an RN, and maybe if you and I can figure out the traveling nurse problem, we can make a lot of money. So that's a separate issue. Rhonda, I want to talk about your research. And, as the senator said, and as we all know, the state is a mosaic of communities. It's got some larger, some smaller, some very underdeveloped or less developed, and some that are more developed. How do you think about communities or states like Vermont who, there's always this drive or desire to be the next, I visit a lot of places and they'll say, oh, we want to be the next Silicon Valley, or we want to be the next, Cambridge. And how do you calibrate that to say, how do we maximize the efficiencies of what we have to have the greatest impact and input rather than be the me too?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, instead of being the next Silicon Valley, I'd like to hear other states say, we'd like to be the next Vermont. And, and here's why. You've got so many different assets, but so many different things that make you special. And one of those is that you've always been sort of mindful of this ideal and the role of ecology, in the intersection of ecology, the environment, with the economy. But you've got a third element in there too that makes you different and makes you unique, and that is about well-being. You are concerned, just like Sunny was saying, with the well-being of each other, of your communities, from the very smallest rural community in the state to Burlington and to other places. And that makes you different because you're combining not only this environmental or ecological awareness with a strong economy, because you do have a resilient economy. We saw that during the recession. We saw that continuing through the pandemic. But you also have this layered on, this ethos of care and concern for each other, or what we call well-being. And that community well-being is something that other places are missing, just like you're talking about Texas. I just flew in from Dallas, so I see some of this, when I'm out and about in different communities. And that's what makes you unique. It makes you different from many other places in the U.S. because you are concerned about well-being. And that is an asset, and it's something you could build on. You also have this distinctiveness, and I think one of you was mentioning this earlier, where Vermont has established, even a long time ago, a distinctive sense of place that is unique and different. You can say Vermont to just about anyone in this country and even beyond, and they will conjure up certain feelings or certain images, and usually it has something to do with natural beauty. It has something to do with what we like to call sort of a crunchy, funky, crunchiness that you have in Vermont, and people know that, and they admire that. And that is something to build on. It's something that you can take with that ethos of care and concern and well-being, with this uniqueness and this distinctiveness of place, and build on that to add value to whatever you produce. You know this, you see it. When you see a product from Vermont, you just gravitate towards it, regardless of where you are in this country, or like I said before, even beyond. And that's assets. That's something to build on. And from the outside looking in, and from a former insider who still very much loves Vermont, is that you can see these assets, and you can see that's what makes you different. So you are a leader in that regard.
So if I could maybe just take a little turn on that, or maybe reframe it a little bit. That sounds very good, right? That we would all row in the same direction, but the reality is there is a tendency to be somewhat hyper-local and focus on, well, that's great what's going on in Burlington, but we're from this part of the state, and Burlington gets everything. And so the competition is not within the state. The competition is beyond the borders. You mentioned Dallas. Dallas is a very fragmented economic environment. You have people in Fort Worth don't think of themselves in Dallas. If you take that whole region together, Dallas, Fort Worth, Plano, Frisco, you have a real powerhouse. And yet, I don't know that they're very efficient in rowing in all the same direction. So, Lindsay, I'm going to put this one on you because this is so easy of a question, but how do you get people in the state to recognize that some efforts, while they may not directly benefit at that moment, longer term will have benefit for them if people are all working off the same sheet of music?
Yeah, thank you. Our team is spending a great deal of time traveling the state. I mean, that's what I do. My day never looks the same, but we travel all around the state, and our governor has made a very big deal to our team to make sure that we're spending our days in the most rural parts of the state and understanding and listening. So recently, the state received $2.8 billion in federal aid related to COVID. It's called ARPA funds, and we are trying to make sure that the most rural parts of our state are getting access to that money. And what we know is we have to be intentional to be sure that those regions have the opportunity to get at the money first, because the municipalities like Burlington and South Burlington, here in Chittenden County, they have much bigger municipal governments that have grant writers or access to grant writers. They have an opportunity to get at that money so much faster. And so what happens is the rural communities just continue to be left behind. So as we've been traveling around and listening to these stories, what we're hearing is the small municipalities are saying to us, we need capacity. We need help, because the select board member who has a day job, who has a busy family, young family, is also trying to volunteer and write the grant. And it's just not sustainable. So with the help of the legislature, we were able to build in some dollars to make sure that capacity building happened. But we still have to, and we're working with our regional planning commissioners. You're going to hear from Catherine Dimitrick later. I see her in the back. And we're trying to make sure that that capacity building is happening. My point here is that it has to be intentional, and people need to understand that if we can build a regional approach, as you just talked about, that we're not taking away from the Burlingtons, right? We're just building them up. We're making them stronger. And another thing that I think that we need to play on right now is that our state is such an aging population, right? And so these volunteers that I'm talking about are getting older, and they're tired. They're saying, we're tired. We're ready. We need some help here.
Why are you looking at me when you're talking about older people, Lindsay?
They're saying, we are tired. But remote work has been a game changer. We have seen people come to our state and they're choosing to live in some of the most rural parts of our state because they can, and they can still work remotely. So now we've started to bring in another, a group of young people to these communities. And what I'm saying for everyone in the room is get involved in your community. If you're living in the most rural communities, be involved. Be that person now that is starting and lifting your community up, because it's going to take all of us to lift all of these rural regions up. And what's the saying? Rising tides lifts all boats. This is exactly what that means. When we lift the rural communities, and Vermont can show the world what that means. We can do this. We're a little pilot project here. We'll show them.
Okay, so go ahead, clap. There you go. All right, great. All right, so
I'm a little
Suresh,
jazzed.
I want to correct you for 1 second. You said the state doesn't have Fortune 500 companies. The university is a de facto Fortune 500 company, right? You have intellectual capital here. You have those high-paying, knowledge-based jobs that people talk about. You have Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers that are in the region. So, I think that's important to keep that in mind when you talk about the university and its role. I know, you and I both come from research backgrounds. I know that funding here has doubled over the past decade from external sources. It's a very competitive world out there trying to get external funding. You talked a little bit, Lindsay, about grant writers and these things. Suresh, how do you think about winning those opportunities, those competitive opportunities? I mean, certainly the directed appropriations opportunities are great, but how do you win the competitive opportunities and make those sustainable so that you can actually grow the economic well-being of the state and in the region because you're doing good work to support national and global interests?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And really, I'll follow up where Lindsay left off. My first semester here, we started this Office of Engagement, which was effectively to sort of spread the technical assistance and the presence of the university across all 14 counties. And I think despite COVID having hit along the way, the Office of Engagement is very well recognized across the state. And now, with Senator Leahy's help, we have this Institute for Rural Partnerships. This really has the opportunity to be a game changer. We use that word often, but I think this will be one. 10 years from now, we'll look back and see that this was when things started changing. So it's a very different model. When I first talked to Senator Leahy about it, he was very excited because none of the big universities talk about rural issues. These rural partnerships aren't exactly sexy, and people aren't thinking about them all the time, and so we can show how to do it. It's about convening stakeholders around the state where they are. It's about supporting them with grant writing help and offering exactly that little bit of support to take them over to write grants, to file for patents, et cetera, but focus on rural issues that matter to these neglected areas. And so we are also, I guess, with the funding we have available, we're looking to fund these startup efforts. We're willing to, where we've got the resources to support, sort of get them over that hump to start becoming successful. And therefore, we think what we will do here in Vermont is to show how a rural community as a state can prosper. But what state is not rural? California is rural, Indiana is rural. I mean, every state has very large rural populations, and we're hoping this stands up as an example for the rest of the country. We know the challenges of living in small towns and such, but increasingly, cities are struggling with keeping people there. So I think we have to double down on the quality of life issues, that we can offer quality of life in Vermont that you cannot get in a big city. Mm-hmm. And so how do we capitalize on that? How do we grow that and show that again as a model?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, Suresh. I mean, McKinsey just put out a report about younger workers and what their interests are, and it's less about compensation. It's more about work-life balance and quality of life. And those are things that obviously, especially this time of year, you can offer people, right? Okay, Sonny, go ahead, please.
Can you hear me still? Yeah.
Hear you now.
So I was just going to say that just to build off of everything that Lindsay and Suresh were saying about rural health, there's a couple things that we'd have to realize about rural health. So probably 45 to 50 million people in America live in rural areas. Vermont, Northern New York, is all rural from a classification point of view. But it has some health consequences, and I want to connect what we're saying. The health consequences are that if you look at the top 5 causes of death, cancer, stroke, heart disease, lung disease, pulmonary disease like COPD, and unintended deaths like motor vehicle accidents, gunshot violence of any sort, substance use disorder, all of those, I put those into 5 categories, all of those mortality rates are higher when you get to rural areas. And what that means is that all of those things are higher for us in our state in northern New York. And this is where I think Suresh has already been a great partner with me, quite frankly, and we've talked a lot. And now we've got to turn this into action about how we're going to work together to be innovative so that Vermont becomes the model for the country. Because when we take our 1 million people in northern New York and Vermont and show how we can decrease the mortality for those kinds of things, that's where the work is for us, to be the model for the country to do that. So it's a really important part of rural healthcare for us.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly is a lot happening in rural health and innovation. I mean, just things like telemedicine. And, one of the benefits, I mean, Suresh talks about California being rural. Certainly there are parts, but the state can be a living laboratory and an example. And if I could, I'd just like to, make a comment. I think it's important that people see Vermont outside and beyond the borders here. And that means not having fancy marketing campaigns, but actually having substance that you can then communicate. It's the difference between selling and communicating. When I graduated from college, I sold timeshares in Walt Disney World out in Kissimmee. I was one of those guys on the street that, hey, do you want a $25 meal from Golden Corral to see it, right? And it was terrible because it was a terrible product, and we were selling something that I didn't believe in. When you believe in something and you can communicate that, that's very powerful. So, to the extent that you can be seen nationally and globally to communicate those assets and the passion that you all clearly have for the state, I think it's extremely important. And then people will wake up a little bit and say, hey, Vermont's maybe a place we can do some things. I want to turn, like I said, I want to leave some time for questions at the end, but I want to talk about the talent issue a lot more. We talk about infrastructure, we talk about intellectual capital, we talk about innovation ecosystems or just ecosystems generally. The battle for talent is incredible. My wife has a startup company in South Carolina. She recruits software developers to Columbia, which, is not certainly a mecca. And the question is, how do you retain the talent that you're creating at the university and in other colleges and even at the high school level? How do you retain talent here and recruit talent into the state? Because the people with talent win. At the end of the day, you have to have talent. So, I don't know if I'll open up to any of you all to talk about that, but I think this talent issue is really important. And so I'm sure you're thinking about it every day.
Well, I'll start, and we definitely have some challenges, right? We have a shortage of nurses and doctors across the country, and we're going to have that shortage for the next 5 to 10 years. And so we've got to create an environment that is incredibly inviting and promising for people to come and move and live here. And I think one of the challenges we have, interestingly for me, is that as I've been traveling around over the last 6 months, and you might see some people here that feel this way, which is about half of Vermonters that I've encountered don't want the state to get any bigger. And it's a really interesting, well, we've got one of those people here. And I think it really is a paradigm of sorts because we need more people to come here. We need more nurses, we need more doctors, we need more people to just care for us because we're getting older. And we need people that deliver buildings and food, and it's an interesting dichotomy that we as a community have to come together and recognize so that we can work together with our governments to generate more businesses that want to come here, create environments so people can find places to live, childcare, that's a good thing that's happening, right? I just want to feed you the answers to be able to solve this. And as you know, our healthcare system and our universities are actually contributing now because we recognize that we have to be a part of the society that creates housing, creates childcare, and we're both doing that in our own ways. But we need our government and we need our people to recognize that that's going to be really important for our state to be able to attract people. We've got to create that environment.
So Suresh,
yeah.
go ahead.
Let me add to the issue, and then Lindsay can solve it all. So you talked about a Fortune 500 company, and absolutely, I think the University of Vermont has a massive presence and should be a massive part of the solution. So we add about 1,150 of our graduates into the Vermont economy every year, and a good number of them come from out of state. So we are probably the largest attractor of high-quality talent into the state. People want to live here. Our graduates want to stay here. How do we make it more attractive for them to do so? How do we make the state stickier? And this is where we are working with Vermont employers to have paid internships for our students so that from their very first year here, they're working at Vermont businesses and NGOs and other places, and are experiencing this. I think if you wait till their fourth year and try to recruit them, they've already found jobs in Boston and New York and such. So I think those internships all along are very, very important. Housing is a huge issue in Vermont, across Vermont, and we do really need to get to the bottom of that. Childcare is huge, and Lindsay's going to address these things next. But I do think the quality of life issues are critical, but we need to address them. I don't think there's a dearth of people wanting to stay here. I mean, ask Kyle. By the way, if anybody wants to take a bathroom break, don't do it during his talk. He'll be the most interesting talk during the whole summit. He's succeeding. He's got, 300, 400, 500 people that he keeps adding. So how do we make it easier for these people to stay and make Vermont a more permanent home? So, Lindsay.
Before I go, Rhonda, would you like to?
Sure. The one thing I wanted to say is that the major factor in retention of talent anywhere, not just Vermont, but when you look across the whole landscape, is quality of life, which also implies things like cost of living and access to the services and things that you need to thrive and not only survive but thrive, things like child care and things like affordable housing. So quality of life, and you've got that in Vermont. I think sometimes people don't realize that. They don't look beyond the natural beauty, for example, to see what the high quality is. And so, Lindsay probably knows this far better than me, that you can market that as a way to recruit and retain talent.
So, Rhonda, I want to follow on a little bit. You spent a lot of time in West Lafayette. Suresh did as well. I visited once in January. Don't ever visit West Lafayette in January. I tried to drive from Indianapolis Airport. It was a losing proposition, right? But West Lafayette is pretty distant from a major hub, and yet it's a fantastic ecosystem there in terms of the companies, the Fortune 500 companies that have locations to be near the talent at Purdue. The city is, I think I've visited several times over the last decade. See the city's maturation and evolution over that time. And it's market-driven. It's not because they got a congressional appropriation to make that happen. Your scholarship, you spent time there, you've lived it. What things may be transferable to a state or a community like Burlington and Vermont? And you think about those lessons.
Sure, absolutely. Well, West Lafayette has grown tremendously, and the source of that growth is, of course, Purdue University drives that with their research and with their education, predominantly the research that connects partnerships to industry and brings those industries in. And so even though when you look at it from a location analysis perspective, it is fairly remote. It's 2.5, 3 hours from Chicago. It's an hour, 15-hour half from Indianapolis. So it is rural, but what it has is that juggernaut of education research with Purdue. This is what UVM is in many ways. I heard the impressive stats on the increase in your research, and that will become even more so for that. And a couple of things to sort of be mindful of is don't lose your distinctive essence as you begin to grow, which you will, and also retain that quality of life, because that's what makes a difference. People want to come to a place like West Lafayette, which is, for all practical purposes, a rural community, because of that and because of those educational resources. And you've got the same ingredients here, perhaps at a smaller scale than Purdue, but those same ingredients are here.
Yeah, so Rhonda and I spent 20 years at Purdue, and I'm very proud that we were part of the system that attracted maybe 5,000 very high-paying jobs to this rural place in the middle of cornfields. So there are things to learn from there. And as Rhonda said, the main reason these companies come, or other entities come to West Lafayette is because of the talent, right? We talked about talent. Talent is hugely important. And if you can provide the workforce, then companies are attracted. Now, I don't think that what happened in West Lafayette is what we want to do here in Burlington necessarily or across Vermont. The solutions will be different and the look will be different. But I want to say that it's actually happening now. I mean, the University of Vermont, for a long time, I think, was not focused on startup companies and commercialization, et cetera. With Kirk's help and others, I think Corinne Farwell is here in the audience. And you mentioned Hula, you mentioned, or VSET, and Dave Bradbury maybe in the audience, et cetera. There's a lot of good things happening. We've had 3 companies out of the University of Vermont that have done really well. Benchmark Space Systems and CoreMap and Packetized Energy, which is now acquired and such. So it's happening, and I think we just need to do it at a different scale. But the reason that we will be able to attract the kind of, say, attention that we did in West Lafayette is because of the talent we produce. And UVM is ready to be a partner in that.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time. Lindsay, if you want to add anything, great, but otherwise I'll have another question.
You may move on. I was only going to react to sort of the broad attracting, but you can move
Great.
on.
So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I do want to give an opportunity for the audience to ask a question or two. I want to wrap up with somewhat of a challenge or a difficult question. How do you create a sense of urgency and move beyond happy talk? To be honest, I visit a lot of places, and there's a lot of this, a day conference like this, and people get really excited, and then it's like exponential decay, right? As soon as people leave, it's on to the next thing. How do you create a sense of urgency to accomplish the goals that you collectively have identified today as part of this panel?
Well, first and foremost is often, because as economic community developers, as you say, we tend to focus on the very positive and get people excited about doing things. But most people find that pick a topic, pick an issue, whatever's top of mind. If it's unemployment among single mothers, if it's a cost of housing or lack of affordable housing, whatever the topic is for your community, pick one at least, and then start dividing up who's going to do what. Form some action teams. Put people on it. Don't just say, oh, we've got this problem, hopefully someone will address it. Actually assign it out to people to tackle it. And you would be surprised what can happen when you bring together even a small group of people around an issue. Because by doing that, you're also helping all these other things that make you a viable, attractive place to live and to retain talent and to grow, And so I think that's the key, is, you form your action groups immediately. Find out what that is top of mind and tackle it. Don't let it just sit there.
So, I might share, we have a strategic plan, right? And we have our objectives identified, and it kind of goes back to talking about housing and childcare and infrastructure and, strong communities. And, we do the same idea, right? Is like, we know that we don't have the luxury of time. There's no silver bullet to fixing the challenges that we have, but we need to act now. If we want, we have at least a quarter less students in our public education system than were there when I graduated from Montpelier High School many decades ago. And the reality is we need to be building that pipeline, but to do that and to attract businesses to our state, which also attracts more people to our state, we have to have homes for them to live in, and we have to have childcare. If there's something that we learned out of the pandemic, when childcare suddenly wasn't there, right? When your clinicians can't show up to take care of people because, people aren't there to take care of, the childcare centers are closed, we realize that's a very critical infrastructure component in our community. So we need to be building all of this stuff at the same time. And so we had to sort of identify, four legs of the stool that we were working on. And to Rhonda's point, assigning people and putting measurables there and timeframes so that we would be meeting those marks. And it's hard work and it's fluid, like things are changing all the time, and it's a challenge. But to your point, you have to set a goal and go after it and be ready to be nimble every day.
So Tony, let me just underline what you said, right? Workshops, summits are great, but if if action doesn't follow, then there's no, they're a wasted effort. So I'll just give you a small example, right? I've hosted a few breakfasts with groups of CEOs. Maybe a dozen of them show up, and we've had amazing conversations. And what we discovered, Kirk has joined me at those things, that is exactly this thing that I said earlier, that Vermont is really good at having companies in that mid-sized range, 300 million, 150 million or so. We discovered that there's this amazing cluster of power electronics companies here. We just don't get the word out. How do we work together? And that was what we were talking about, branding and sort of getting the word out, et cetera. And so I guess at least our contribution to that question is that this is the start of our Institute for Rural Partnerships. And Tricia Coates has a lot on her plate here, and we'll all be at the table together. So this is just a start. It's not just a fancy celebration. And we are hoping that all the people here in the room and those listening online actually hold us to it, come to us with great ideas that we can then support. And I'm hoping that next year, Cynthia, you may not want to do this again, but next year we do something like this and we actually talk about what the progress has been. So we're at the table and you should hold us to it.
Great, thank you, Suresh. And I would also maybe just add, I think a year is short. I think you have to also look at this, in longer cycles. But I do think doing an honest and as objective assessment as possible of the assets and the opportunities that exist in your ecosystem is extremely important. You don't have to publicize that, by the way. I'll be honest, no community wants to go out and say, oh, well, these are our shortcomings, and this is where we're not being successful and where we need to do better. But be honest with yourselves as you go about this journey, and then set reasonable goals. What's 1, 3, 5, 10 years. We talked about some other areas. There wasn't a switch that made those things happen. It was a long-term investment and commitment of people to move things forward. And so I think, that's the opportunity, and it's exciting for this fantastic state as it moves forward. And I hope to come back and see how the journey continues. I would like to open it up for a question or two from the audience. I mean, this is a fantastic panel. So does anybody have a question? We can get a mic out. Any questions from anybody? Okay. Oh, there's a question right there. Come on down. Oh, someone's running at a mic with you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please introduce yourself.
It's on.
Okay. I'm Lise Verno. I'm involved in a lot of different aspects of Vermont and promoting Vermont, from municipalities to cultural and economic avenues. But my question is to the panel and maybe to the president. There's a lot of businesses in here, a lot of organizations, and you spent the first few minutes talking a lot about grants and grant applications, the grant process and what's available through the federal government. So I often hear people saying, boy, if I could only get some of those grants, and they don't know how to apply for them. Just like you say, smaller communities don't have. I'm with the City of Burlington as well. And even in the City of Burlington, we just barely hired a grant division. We just created the grant division, and we've been around for a long time. So I know that there is a need for help. And I wonder if the university is the place that has maybe students that can help businesses and organizations apply for grants and be grant writers and know what the resource pool is. Is there an avenue as a to-do action item that might help all these organizations that are in the room today that are looking for additional funding or research monies?
So there's thank you for the question. There's two different kinds of grants that I believe you're kind of referencing. One is, how can the Institute for Rural Partnerships support efforts, right, across the state? And then how do we help those entities go after large federal grants, say, right? So in terms of that barrier to entry, to work with the Institute for Rural Partnerships, it will be as low as can be, as is possible. What we're going to do is to have convenings across the state with experts, but also local stakeholders, identifying, that's part of the job of the Institute, that to identify what kinds of investments make sense and to make those investments. There won't be some extended proposals needed. I mean, there's obviously a process for it, and in fact, Senator Leahy has offered to sort of help us think through the kinds of investments it can make. But the Institute will make it very easy to access, for people to access its resources. But then the question is, how do we help them? How do we work together to help them go after, venture capital if appropriate, or federal grants, or state monies, or whatever. So it'll be it'll intercede to help with the larger resources.
Okay. Yeah, and there are some great examples in other states where a university like Vermont, the University of Vermont, has taken on a statewide effort to support activities like grant writing or management of intellectual property. And so there are some things that can be done, but also the university then needs to have those resources given to it to allow it to do those things and support it. You can buy me a beer later, Suresh, for that comment. So, all right, I think there's a question in the back.
By the way, this guy, Tony, I don't know if you introduced himself, but he is the country's leading expert in this space, and I'm so thankful that he's here. Tony, can you take 30 seconds and just say what you do?
Sure, yeah. So UIDP is a global network of 200 multinational companies and leading research universities from around the world, and we try to focus on ways to get greater impact from those collaborations between the academic, corporate, government, and increasingly nonprofit or charity sector. So, foundations are thinking about how do they partner with the federal government, universities, companies of various sizes to have impact. I think that's one of the lessons we learned from COVID. If there was a silver lining to COVID, one of the things we learned is how do we put aside these little barriers to collaboration that we get so focused on and come up with a solution. AstraZeneca and Oxford weren't worried about royalty rates when people were dying in the UK. They were worried about getting a solution, right? And it's something that we focus on every day. So very proud to have the University of Vermont as a member of our group, and we'll continue the good fight. You can check us out or come find me later. I'll be around all day. Thank you.
Yeah, Tony's always thought we were among the best at doing this stuff. That's why I like him. Anyway.
Yeah, there you go. All right, I think we had another question. Yes, all the way in the back.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Can you hear me? I guess so.
Yes.
My name's Michael Moser. I'm a researcher at the UVM Center for Rural Studies, and my question is really just about the sort of interplay between this concept of attracting entrepreneurs and businesses to the state and the other side of the equation, which is the workforce that exists here in the state and the resources that we're putting into Vermonters that live here now that may be underemployed or experiencing low employment. So I'd like to know more about how perhaps UVM interacts with the state college system, how the state of Vermont can further support the state college system and can support our tech centers at high schools around the state. We need to be putting resources into those places as well in order to build that workforce. So if you have any ideas about that interplay and how to be working on both sides of the equation, that'd be interesting to hear about. Thank you.
All right, I'll take the first stab, and Suresh can clean up my mess. Honestly, we are all working together. There is a lot of energy where a variety of different folks are coming to the table from each of the colleges and universities around the state, the Department of Labor, the head of workforce development. We are very well connected with the employers in the state and understanding what their needs are. And to your point, we need to make sure that we are preparing and training the pipeline to make sure that they're ready to take those jobs. And right now, we have far more job vacancies than we have people to fill those. And so that is why we're working to also be, bringing people in to the state, right? We're doing both. We're working on both. But I can assure you that we're working together in ways that probably never happened before. Again, you talked about silver linings from COVID. The walls have come down. And, just last week, we were in a room with a company who is considering our state to move to, And they're also considering a few other states. We had workforce development directors from UVM, Vermont Technical College, or Vermont State University, apologies, the Regional Development Corporation. We had Joyce Duty in the room. We are all there at the table showing that we are one team that will work together to try to make sure that we're training people to take their jobs. So is it perfect? Probably not. We probably have a ways to go, but we're working together and we're trying to figure that out and make sure that we're aligned. The other thing I can say is the more high-tech companies or the more unique companies, and even if they're small, there are one or two companies that have an idea that are bringing it to fruition in our state, the more of those that happen, the more talent we're bringing in, right? Because they're seeing the companies like Beta, and they're like, wow, the talent that's right there, they're going to come poach from you, right, Kyle? But Kyle's probably poaching from somebody else. My point is this I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it. This high-tech, these high-tech companies that are in Vermont, they're all looking at each other and they're saying, wow, we've got, electrification, we've got energy storage, and we've got a company making robotics that take the place of divers in the sea. I mean, we have so much right here in the state. I'm sorry, I get really passionate about this, but there's a lot of good effort going on, and the folks that are in the higher ed space are working with the state of Vermont to try to make sure that people are trained to make sure that the pipeline is ready.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo that. We are partnering not just with the University of Vermont, which we are very heavily tied to, both the College of Medicine, College of Nursing and Health Sciences. We start early. We've learned that you can't start when they're coming out. You got to grab them early, give them the internships. But we're also partnering with all the other colleges around. We have 2,000 open jobs today in our network. We're the largest employer in Vermont. We realize that we've got to train our workforce to be able to grab them, and we don't want to do that. We want to partner with everyone. So I love your question. It's really relevant. We've got a workforce that we know we can build up and do that work, and we've got to attract from the outside as well, because we just don't have enough here. So they're both
Okay, so we're at time, and I want to be respectful of our next set of speakers, but please join me in thanking the panel, and I know many of you will be around for the rest of the day for questions during the break, so please join me. Okay.